Hello.
Hi!
Well, how are you?
I'm great.
Good, good, good. Okay, so tell me about yourself, your pronouns, and what you do.
Okay, my name is Anahita. My pronouns are she, her, and I do film stuff and writing, and I like to paint for fun.
We'll both be juniors at Pratt this fall. So what have you learned about yourself as an artist over the past few years? Or, like, about yourself, too?
Well, I feel like my first year at Pratt, like I was still a little bit unsure about what I wanted to say with my body of work and like what my sort of like philosophy was as an artist. But I made a lot of stuff that I really liked. So like it was kind of like my year for like making films. And then this year I haven't made a lot of stuff that I'm super proud of, but I feel like I've made a lot of progress in terms of like what I want to say with my work and like who I am as an artist and like a producer of stuff. And like kind of building on my own academic theory alongside that and like they kind of work in tandem.
Can you talk about some of your projects?
Like previous projects?
Yeah, yeah. Or if you're
Okay.
working on anything now. Anything, everything.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm not currently working on anything. It's kind of been like a difficult time to stay motivated. Um, I wrote a lot of poetry while while we made the transition to online school. So the latest thing that I made was Blue Room Bed, which is my like short poetry collection. I haven't released it yet. I'm kind of waiting for the right time, but it will be available soon. Um, so I am really proud of that. It was kind of something I threw together, like all of the work from 2020, basically, like that I wrote in studio and stuff. So yeah, it's kind of an encapsulation of my experience at home during the coronavirus, and the circumstances surrounding it. And then I don't know, this semester in expanded cinema, I did a lot of sort of semi documentary experimental hybrid, like nonfiction fiction hybrid. And also, I don't know. I really think this was a year for learning. Like, I don't know if it was a year for producing for me. I feel like I'm just learning a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love your poetry book. It's so like special and like a nice little like thing. Like I can't wait to have a physical copy of it. Um, but do you have any ideas um, about what you want to make in the future, like writing or film?
I have a character that I kind of developed in our screenwriting class last semester. And I don't like the story I wrote for her, but I want to do something else with this character and maybe build off of it. Um, I'm assuming that when we go back, there's going to be restrictions on, how many people can be on a set or like what actors can do to each other, unfortunately. But I am kind of excited. Like at first I was upset, but I'm kind of excited to work around that, and be like creative. And a lot of my films kind of focus on one character anyways, and I've done that in the past, so I could totally do it again. And I kind of had this idea that I've been throwing around for a while of like, you know, like really cicadas, like not in California anymore. Like really, I do kind of like the realistic, like slow realism, mumblecore type thing, like guerrilla style, one camera filmmaking. Um, but I kind of want to incorporate like a fantasy element. Um, like I've always had the idea of having my protagonist be like a modern witch, like
Yes, me
actual
too.
powers. Uh, but like in a really subtle way. I don't know. I kind of want to play with that a little bit because I'm kind of slowly learning that a lot of my work surrounds like my experience as like a female-bodied person and like as a woman, um, and kind of how I interact with the world and how the world interacts with me. So I'm like that's the subject I'm really interested in exploring further.
Can you talk about like how your identity has influenced your work, or like what parts of yourself that you put into your work specifically, like gender, sexuality, like location, anything?
Well, I mean, location is everything. I feel like once I was in New York, I was like, I need to take advantage of this, and that's what my freshman year final was. Like, it was kind of a little tour around the city. Um, I don't know. I think my identity, like, for sure, I'm a queer woman of color, and that does influence a lot of my thinking around my work. It's not always explicit within the work, but it is an influence and like a nudge on my work. Um, and I think also something that I've dealt with a lot personally is like, mental health issues and like, being depressed or like feeling isolated. And I think that manifests itself a lot in my work. Kind of not even just isolation, but solitude. Spending time with characters and, doesn't always need to be something happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've learned a lot about that. Like breaking away from like narrative in the past year has definitely helped a lot of
Yeah,
us.
for sure. Like the concept of just like having a character breathe and move around a space and that communicating something to the audience without, sort of traditional narrative techniques. Um, so yeah, like in a way, and I guess I learned a lot about slow cinema from a couple of my classes. So kind of this concept of like, I mean, slow cinema and like guerrilla filmmaking, kind of these non-traditional ways of filmmaking that have an emphasis on reality and an emphasis on real time and not condensing things for the sake of attention, or attention span.
Or like with the classes that you've taken in the past years, like film or like liberal arts, is there any sort of like common denominator that you've taken away from those classes?
Yeah, I think a lot of my like more academic work this year was focused around my gender identity and also how that relates to my filmmaking practice. Like kind of looking at, like in film classes, looking at indie filmmakers who don't have a lot of resources, who are like mostly minorities, who are just working with, the cheapest materials and the smallest crews and the lowest budgets. But I think more so something that I really arrived at this year, especially with recent current events, um, is that, and this may be kind of a controversial topic, but I think my like sort of brand of feminism has become very anti-capitalist. Like it was already very intersectional, and like I was really into that from like when I was 12 on Tumblr. But like, I think I've really started to understand that like as a filmmaker who's a woman who's Iranian and like is trying to make a name for herself, I want to not be a part of the system. I don't want to feed into it. I don't want to be a part of, the machine, especially Hollywood. I want to be doing things independently. And by independently, I don't necessarily mean like $1 million budget. I mean like $100 budget.
Yeah.
Like I want to be doing things on my own terms and with people that I trust and love and, can, but yeah, anyways, I think that's been a common theme is, kind of breaking down these structures of colonialism and patriarchy and capitalism all at once, just through the way I practice my art. And that sounds very vague and like broad and airy, but that's what it is.
Is there anything that's been inspiring you recently or generally, like movies, writing, or music?
Well, the most recent movie I watched for the first time was Sorry to Bother You. I watched it this morning, for the first time. I don't know why I never watched it. I just never got around to it. Everyone I knew loved it, but I just didn't watch it at the time. And I'm very upset that it did not receive the recognition it deserved, because it is, like, Parasite was popular for a certain reason, and Sorry to Bother You, went into that reason much more in depth and with a really interesting premise that like was incredibly creative to me. And again, like, I think I'm starting to want to bring a bit more fantasy into my work, and it's very visually, you know, creative and out there. And I don't know, Boots Riley just doesn't give a fuck, and I think that's super cool. And it just went into so many different topics so gracefully, like racism and, you know, exploitation of the lower class. You know, it was, really good movie.
That reminds me of Okja too, since that's also in like a sort of non-realistic but very realistic at the same time.
Yeah, that was my first Bong Joon-ho movie that I watched. I was actually talking about it with Patrick earlier today. Okja really blew my mind the first time I saw it, because I think it's really cool that the way that he makes the audience sympathize with factory farming and like the pigs is just by making them bigger. You know, that's the only real difference between that world and this world, is that they have a genetically engineered like super
and
pig.
it's like special.
Yeah.
And like rare.
And Tilda Swinton is fantastic in
it. Okay, so are you taking directing actors next year?
Yes, I am.
Nice.
With my favorite, Matthew Heisel.
I guess, can you talk about your experience with working with actors so far?
So, yeah, directing. I love directing. I think my philosophy with directing actors is a little bit different than, like, what is traditional or, like, suggested. I have gone through the process of, you know, using Backstage and, like, finding someone for my film, like, if I couldn't access them any other way. But I really enjoy directing the most when I'm, like, directing people I already know. I love using, like, non-actors or, like, friends who act, because I feel like directing is all about the relationship you have with the actors and the crew, especially the actors. Like, I like to sit down with my actors before we do a scene to, you know, talk, maybe get coffee a week in advance and talk about it. Because it's just so important that not only they understand what they're doing in the film, but they understand, like, where I'm coming from and what I want us to do. It's like a collaboration thing. I love improv for that reason. It's like bouncing back and forth. I'm not the only one with the ideas, usually.
I guess you probably said this, but what's your favorite, like, part of filmmaking, or, like, your favorite role? Or even, like, not a role, like, just your favorite part about it?
My favorite part of filmmaking... Okay, well, I love filmmaking for, like, a lot of reasons, and I love the creativity that goes into it. Like, it really gives me a lot of adrenaline and makes me feel really good. That's the only way I can describe it. But I have to say, like, the aspect of filmmaking that saved my life the most is the collaboration aspect. And I think that it really forced me to get out of my comfort zone socially. And I've just had the most wonderful experiences. You know, when you work on a set with people who care about what they do, you become so close. And, like, I don't know, that's, like, how I've made most of my friends at school. So, yeah, I love collaborating. I love showing my work to my friends and having them give me, you know, feedback, or, you know, hey, can I send you this idea? Like, what do you think? Like, do you know, like, what I should do with this? And just, like, supporting each other and, like, wanting each other to succeed instead of having a weird competitive thing, because we all need each other so badly. It's really hard to be a loner and be successful in the field. Not impossible, but, you know, it's hard.
And there's, like, a ton of, I guess, like, the concept of, like, the lone artist, or, like, the, like, genius artist, which is usually, like, a man. It's, like, nice to not...
Right, and it's also, like, I feel like people kind of have this misconception that things like, you know, painting is something that you do completely alone, or, like, writing is something you do completely alone, but, like, any art, like, you need collaboration, you need other people's eyes on it. Like, otherwise you kind of, you know, sometimes you need to put away your ego and let other people tell you that something is shit, and that's how you grow from it and make something better.
So how did you get into, like, art and then film and writing, like, with, like, childhood, and I guess how you ended up moving to New York and, like, being at Pratt?
Okay, great question. So my mom wanted to be an artist when she was younger, so she liked to paint. And sort of as soon as I was, like, able to do anything, hold a pencil or a paintbrush or whatever. I was painting stuff like with watercolors with like 2 colors. It's like, you know, some nice abstract art when I was like 3. And also I learned how to read at a very young age, and I started to learn how to write. Like, I taught myself how to write. So I would, like, when I had a babysitter, I would just follow her around the house asking her how to spell different words, and like I would write a sentence or something. So that's how I started writing. And in middle school, I got really into photography, and I was also getting into writing at the same time, and I did these workshops with this woman named Rondi, and it was this kind of homeschool group. So I was homeschooled for 2 years.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, but that's like when my writing really started and my photography stuff really started, and I basically made a deal with myself that I needed to figure out what I wanted to study by the time I finished my sophomore year of high school, because I'm insane. So I decided that I didn't really feel completely satisfied with any of these things that I was doing artistically. I knew I wanted to be an artist. When I was in the 2nd grade, I decided I'm going to be an artist when I grow up, and I didn't stop saying that after the 2nd grade, which is cool. I figured it. I got really lucky. I figured it out. But at one point I was like, oh, I'm going to study psychology. I'm going to do something practical. And then with the guidance of a few, you know, people in my life, I made the right decision, and I was like, I think film is the best thing for me. I can write, I can do photography, I can do visual stuff, I can be creative, I can sort of like fill the blanks that I'm feeling in those areas. So yeah, and I always wanted to move to New York. I was telling my parents I was going to move to New York when I was a kid, and they didn't believe me, and then I did it. And I never felt like I fit in anywhere until I moved to Brooklyn, so it's been nice.
I guess we're like part of an interesting like group of people where we like knew what we wanted to do, and we're like doing it, especially like in a creative field. So I feel like do you have any advice for people who like want to like pursue something creative but are too like afraid to like actually do it, or like if for like whatever reasons, like family, like money,
right? I think my biggest piece of advice, because I've talked to people in my life who don't do a certain artistic practice that they want to do because either they're like afraid that they're bad at it, or they say like, oh, I'm not good at this, or, you know, like, I think the family thing is a whole different, you know, situation to figure out. But I think with any artistic practice, you cannot stop at the first few tries. If you want to draw, you need to draw a lot before you can make something that you like, or that's good, technically. But also I think it's also about knowing when to be easier on yourself. I think the most important thing I've learned about, you know, art and like filmmaking is that you shouldn't worry so much, and you should just do what you want. Artistically, you should just, you know, follow your instincts, basically. You shouldn't overthink. You shouldn't think about every decision you're making in a piece. You should just do what you feel and not worry about it, because you'll look back and you'll be proud of it. You'll be proud that you followed your instincts.
I guess like for me with editing, one of like the best things I've learned is just like experimenting and just like literally doing whatever, and if I want to make it, you know, not so crazy, then I can do that, but at least I like venture out.
you just try new things and like see what sticks. Like you never know if you'll like a certain like genre or choice or like visual style until you try it. So, you know, fuck around.
I think I asked you this already, but are there any like movies that have inspired you?
Okay, well, in high school, I think this is what I usually talk about. It's interesting because I've actually gotten to the point where one of these movies I have a lot of complaints about one of these movies now. But in high school, I remember watching Blue is the Warmest Color and Lars von Trier's Nymphomaniac films.
In high school.
Interesting films to watch when you're, 15.
Yeah.
But I think that what I liked about those films still really stands within, like, my philosophy, which is they both deal with a sort of visceral woman experience. They both have really interesting sort of perspectives on female sexuality, and the kind of complexity, both like internal and external, like societally, with that. And also just Lars von Trier, he's kind of crazy, but in those films he makes a lot of cool editing choices and kind of brings in outside material, like academic stuff, into his films. And it's visually very pleasing and very interesting and attention-grabbing. So I really like how he told the story. And then in Blue is the Warmest Color, you know, it's a more direct, sort of slow cinema, like realism type situation, which I was also really inspired by. But now I kind of have a problem with that movie, and I have a lot to say about, you know, straight men directing queer movies about women. But yeah, those two movies, I think, like, kind of assured me about what I wanted to make when I was younger. Yeah.
Thanks. Is there anything you want to add or anything else you want to talk about?
I don't think so. I always ask that question when I interview people, but now I'm realizing that it's kind of hard to answer. I always ask that question. Is there anything